She was only 7, her dress torn and thin against the mountain wind. Beside her twin sister, she pressed her small hands to the glass, eyes fixed on a crust of bread no one wanted. "Get away, you're nothing but trouble," the shopkeeper barked, and the street fell silent. Everyone looked away. But one man did not. A soldier who had once known hunger stood watching, his loyal German shepherd at his side. He stepped forward, not with grand words, but with a single choice to stand between cruelty and innocence. What began with a stale loaf of bread would unravel secrets buried for decades and force an entire town to face the truth it had tried to forget. The mountain wind carried the smell of pine and copper dust when the street of Silver Ridge tilted toward morning. And in that slant of pale light, 2 little girls in torn pink dresses pressed their faces to the fogged glass of Hargreaves General and Pharmacy. Ellie Mae, the bolder twin by a heartbeat, kept one palm flat against the window as if warmth might seep through it. Lila Rose tucked her chin, the careful one, the kind who counts crumbs and saves the bigger half for her sister. Inside, under a humming neon cross that promised remedies, Maeve Hargreaves stood with her hair wound into a strict gray bun and a ledger-thin mouth that had forgotten how to soften. Maeve's hands were lacquered hard by decades of cash drawers and winter air. She had learned, growing up behind her father's counter, that mercy could not be tallied and therefore could not be afforded. "Get away from the glass," she snapped, voice sharp enough to nick the morning. "We don't give handouts. Not to beggars and not to trouble." The words struck the twins the way thrown pebbles strike pond water, not lethal, but widening rings that go on and on. From the small knot of townsfolk pretending to be late for their own lives, a man stepped forward with the kind of stillness that draws a line in rough sand. Silas Kane, 38, wore a sun-faded military jacket zipped high against the cold and the old habit of scanning roofs and corners. His face held the calm of someone who had been taught to measure breath between thunder and impact. A faint scar lifted one eyebrow, and a deeper one hid just under the collar, where a blast years ago had taught him that endings can be loud and beginnings quieter still. At his knee paced a German shepherd with a black saddle and amber eyes lit by an intelligent patience. Valor was his name, though Silas rarely said it. The dog had learned from base drills and desert nights to hold steady until asked, to listen for the small noises that mean everything. A loose bolt, a change in wind, a child's breath quickening. Once, in a choking sandstorm, Valor had braced his body against Silas's legs to keep him upright. Once, he had found a lost boy by the river, not with barking, but with an insistent nudge and argument made of fur and will. "How much?" Silas asked inside, tapping the glass case that had become a museum of day-old things. "The loaf." Maeve squinted at him over the register, measuring the cost of making way for one small act. "270, and take it away from my door." He laid a 5 and told her to keep the change. No sermon, no scold. He walked out with the paper bag tucked in his palm, Valor's shoulder brushing his thigh like punctuation. The twins stiffened as he approached. That's how it is when your days have taught you that gifts hide hooks. Silas crouched so he wouldn't tower, held the bag out level with their breath. Ellie watched the bread as if it might vanish. Lila watched the man as if he might. Valor, that diplomat, tilted one ear and let out a soft, careless sneeze that broke the tension's taut thread. "I'll pay you back," Ellie whispered, voice thin as a reed. "Tomorrow, we pick cans by the gas station." Silas nodded once. A soldier's compact. He did not ask their names. The town would teach him soon enough. When they ran light, quick, the kind of run that carries bread like contraband, he didn't call after them. He simply rose, slipped the receipt into his pocket, and began to walk in the way of a man who has decided the day will not dismiss him. Silver Ridge itself was a quilt of corrugated roofs and adobe paint bleached to husks. The storefronts sun-cracked but stubborn. Wind rattled prayer through the cottonwoods. A distant train stitched a silver seam across the valley. Silas followed the twins at the speed of shadows, giving them room to be children and himself room to remember. He had once, at 11, stood outside a church kitchen with a bowl he hadn't earned. A woman with nicotine breath had told him to come back Sunday, as if hunger understood calendars. Memory can shape a posture, It had taught him to move gently toward small lives. The girls wound through the back of Delgado's junkyard, where dry grass was a field of fine needles. They cut left at the empty feed store, tucked into a strip of houses sagging like old teeth. Their door hung crooked, a splintered plank with no number and the paint scraped to a ghost of blue. Before they could knock, a voice slurred from within, the kind of slur that isn't a dialect but a wound. "You begged again? You think shame feeds you?" Darla Quinn was their aunt, and by default their weather. 34 but aged at the edges, she wore a threadbare bathrobe that had learned the shape of her despair. There was a time she had worked the Navajo Lake cabin summers and saved her tips in a coffee can. Then her sister got sick and the can emptied, and somewhere between grief and gin, the slope got slippery. She loved the twins. In some snarled, blunted way, love survives in hard houses, but she did not know how to make love look like bread at breakfast. The door yawned shut. Silas stayed on the far side of the road, hands in pockets, Valor sitting with the easy readiness of a dog who reads his handler's pulse. "We'll need a vantage," Silas murmured, half to himself, half to the animal who had become his sounding board. He rented by noon the room above Maudie's laundromat directly across from Hargreaves. The room had a brass bed that creaked like a ship and curtains the color of diluted soup. But the window was good glass and looked down on the pharmacy door as if it were a stage. He unpacked with the methodical thrift of a man who'd kept his world in rucksacks. A leather notebook with a broken spine, a phone charger, a roll of painter's tape, a zip of evidence bags with lines for time and place. Valor drank deeply from the enamel bowl, then nosed the backpack until Silas set out the battered tennis ball, a small comic relief in rooms that could sour. "Work," Silas said softly, and the dog's mood shifted like a trained muscle. Near dusk, he walked the alley behind Hargreaves, every sense tuned to the dull symphony of a small town shutting down. Valor ranged a yard ahead, nose low, the long tail writing cursive in the air. At the pharmacy door's metal threshold, something nicked the light small amber, a vial, no label. He let Valor sniff, then dropped it into a bag, labeled it HGPALLEY 1730, and slid it into the inside pocket where he used to keep mission briefings. He took a slow photo of the trash cans, the back door, the rectangle of light around the jam, all the ordinary things that become significant if you are patient enough to connect them. Vigilance has humor if you let it. A cat on the dumpster lid made eye contact with Valor, decided he was too professional to chase, and went back to being a sphinx. From his window that night, he watched Maeve lock up, the neon cross dying to a red wound, the last customer shuffling away with something small in a brown bag that didn't bear the pharmacy seal. He wrote as the town darkened, 2 girls, bread, shopkeeper hostile, aunt drunk, veil no label. Stay. He paused, tapped the pencil, and added in the margin, as if speaking to his younger self, the boy who'd waited for soup on the wrong day. Nobody told us how to stay then. I know now. Valor, who understood the shift in tone, if not the words, rose from the floor and placed his chin on Silas's knee. That gesture had ended more than one argument in Silas's head. A train sounded again, farther now. Somewhere down the street, a door closed with the relief of a hinge finally oiled. The moon lifted above the ridge, a pale coin pinned to dark felt, and the wind brought a flake of snow or ash, who could tell, in a town where heaters and hearts both sputtered. Silas kept the window cracked, the room cold enough to think. He sorted the day into envelopes in his mind. Children, store, aunt, alley. Each would grow its own evidence soon, he was sure. Not from force, but from attention. He did not plan revenge. He planned to stand. Near midnight, he set the notebook aside and looked at the empty bed that had learned other people's dreams. His were unambitious, a quiet kitchen, coffee that didn't taste like the bottom of a canteen, a child pronouncing breakfast like it was a continent. He closed his eyes but left one palm resting on Valor's shoulder. The dog's breath was slow, a metronome against his wrist. Before sleep, he spoke the vow out loud, as one would in a chapel without pews. This time, I will stay. The dog's ear twitched, the smallest amen. The next morning, Silver Ridge wore a tired face. The air smelled of wood smoke and diesel, and the pharmacy sign flickered as though even its neon tubes had grown weary of advertising false cures. From the second-floor window above Maudie's laundromat, Silas watched Maeve Hargreave unlock the door of her store with the certainty of someone who believed no one could touch her. He opened his notebook, flipped to a clean page, and wrote one word in a steady hand. Medicine. Valor stretched on the floor beside him, paws tapping faintly against the boards, before lifting his head and fixing amber eyes on the street as if to say, "We start today." Silas's first stop was Silver Ridge Elementary, a low-slung brick building with windows that tried their best to look cheerful. Children swarmed the playground, the twins among them, but this time Valor stood close and wagged his tail just enough to be approachable. Ellie Mae was the first to bend, touching his fur cautiously. Lila followed after a pause, her thin fingers brushing Valor's ear like she was testing whether kindness was real. The dog licked her wrist once, and that was enough. They smiled, fleeting smiles that broke through a gray morning. Watching them, Silas could measure how deep neglect had burrowed. Trust was rationed here, given sparingly and then clutched tightly like bread. Miss June Calloway appeared at the school door. She was 31, with chestnut hair tied neatly at the nape and glasses that softened her serious eyes. Born and raised in Santa Fe, she had come to Silver Ridge 3 years earlier, believing small towns might offer steadier ground for her 6-year-old son. Life had made her quiet rather than loud. The absence of a husband, he had left the family suddenly, taking his job and affection north, had forced her into a rhythm of endurance. Her voice, however, still carried warmth, like a piano chord struck in a tired room. "Mr. Kane?" she asked carefully, noting the way he stood near her students. "I was told you asked about the girls yesterday." Silas nodded, introduced himself in clipped terms, and told her he had concerns about what was being sold at Hargreaves. For a moment, hesitation flickered across her face. Then she adjusted her glasses and lowered her voice. "You're not wrong. Half my class comes to school, coughing, wheezing, some with fevers that don't break for days. Their parents say the same thing. The medicine is cheap and easy, and Harriet Maeve tells them it will help." She glanced back toward the hallway and then handed Silas a small folder. "Periodic health reports. Keep them safe. I could lose my position if anyone knew I gave them." He studied her for a beat, saw the kind of courage that didn't trumpet itself, but bent under weight without breaking, and slipped the folder into his coat. Later that afternoon, Silas and Valor made their way down to the edge of town, where the old clinic had shut its doors. Behind it, in a bungalow lined with dry rose bushes, lived Orville Pike. The man answered the knock with a stiff back and silver hair that refused to lie flat, 71 years carved into his skin like old wood. He wore a cardigan with elbow patches and spoke with the deliberate rhythm of someone who once testified in courtrooms. Once a county physician, Orville had been forced to resign after Maeve accused him of negligence when he challenged her stock of discount medicine. He never returned to practice, but the sense of duty clung like the smell of antiseptic. Orville poured 2 cups of bitter tea, motioned Silas to sit, and then, without prompting, slid a manila envelope across the table. "5 deaths," he said bluntly, voice a saw blade dulled by disuse. "Respiratory failure. 3 children, 2 adults. None could afford hospital admission. All bought cough syrup at Hargreaves. All bottles unmarked except for the store's rubber stamp." His hands trembled faintly as he spoke, not with weakness, but with anger that had been forced to live too long underground. Silas listened, Valor curled near his boots as if to anchor the room, and when Orville finished, he asked one question. "Why haven't you spoken to the sheriff?" The older man's laugh was dry. "Cole Maddox? He married Vera, didn't he? And guess whose name is on the pharmaceutical branch that feeds Maeve's shelves? Every complaint goes into a drawer and never comes out." By nightfall, Silas dialed Jasper Reed. Jasper was 40, a lawyer in Albuquerque, with the quick eyes of someone who trusted no contract without reading its shadows. Once roommates with Silas at Fort Hood, Jasper had left the Army to study law, carrying with him a soldier's loyalty disguised under pinstripe suits. His humor was sharp, his posture always straight, and his belief in written proof absolute. Silas relayed what he had gathered. Jasper promised to dig into the state registry. An hour later, his voice came back through the static. Hargreaves Mart runs a subsidiary under Vera Maddox. No FDA license code. All funds trace back to a shared account with Sheriff Cole Maddox. You've got rot from the root? Silas pinched the bridge of his nose, listening to Valor's breathing steady the moment. Then we know where to look. The following day, Valor's role grew wider. At the junkyard, while the twins scavenged soda cans with their canvas bag, Valor tugged Silas toward a corner where an old man bartered scraps. In exchange for broken appliances, Maeve sometimes gave him unlabeled bottles payment in poison. Silas photographed the trade from a distance, each frame a testimony. That evening, Miss June slipped another record into his coat pocket as he walked her to her car. Absentee notes from parents citing persistent coughing and cheap medicine. Orville provided copies of his resignation papers, his margin notes underlined in red. The walls of Silas's room began to fill, evidence stitched by tape and care. It was near midnight when his phone buzzed. A message without a name, letters typed hurriedly. Leave Silver Ridge before some child falls down the stairs. He read it twice, felt the air thicken, then heard Valor rise suddenly from the floorboards. The German shepherd's ears pricked, his body taut, and his throat released a deep warning growl as tires hissed against gravel outside. Silas moved to the window just in time to catch the taillights of a dark sedan disappearing into the street's curve. He rested a hand on Valor's neck, steady but firm. "We're not leaving," he said quietly. The dog's growl faded to a watchful silence. The weeks slid into unease. From his rented room, Silas pinned photo after photo, receipt after receipt, building a wall of truth from scraps the town preferred to ignore. Each taped square was its own silent witness. A bottle with no label, a child's coughing note from Miss June's folder, the faces of Ellie Mae and Lila Rose, waiting by the trash bins for a scrap of bread. Jasper in Albuquerque had coded a hidden corner of the web where Silas uploaded these fragments. The site contained no accusations, only raw evidence, a mirror polished in darkness, left for whoever dared to look. Whispers began in Silver Ridge, hushed conversations at the post office, sideways glances at the pharmacy door. But retaliation arrived quicker than courage. One morning, Miss June discovered her daughter's bicycle chain nearly snapped. A neighbor said he'd seen a stranger loitering by the school fence. A father who had spoken quietly about his son's fevers was dismissed from his job at the lumberyard with no explanation. Fear seeped like water into the cracks, invisible but everywhere. Silas returned one evening to smoke threading out from under his door. Valor lunged ahead, teeth bared, dragging a small canvas bag in his jaws. The hard drive Silas had used for his archives. Flames licked the curtains, blackened the photographs, curled evidence into ash. By the time the fire crew doused the embers, the room was a hollowed ribcage. Maeve Hargreaves stood in the hallway, perfume thick and face powdered as though for a performance. She looked Silas in the eye and let a smile slice across her lips. "Still trying to play hero? You'll leave this town the same way your mother did, unremembered." Then she walked away, her heels clicking like nails. Valor set the bag at Silas's feet. Inside, the hard drive whirred softly, alive. Silas crouched, ran his hand down the dog's strong back, and breathed out. "You saved more than me tonight." That same night, Miss June found an envelope tucked beneath her windshield wiper. Inside were two photos. Her daughter Rachel skipping rope in the schoolyard, and another grainy, taken from behind of Rachel turning down an alley near the general store. A scrawled note. "Children fall downstairs all the time. Don't ask why." June's hands shook, but when she called Silas, her voice steadied. "If I stop now, they win. I won't." In Albuquerque, Jasper doubled his encryption layers, backing up files to servers out of state. His demeanor, usually dry and sardonic, turned clipped and sharp. "They think fear deletes evidence. I'll make sure it multiplies." He stayed up through dawn, his office light spilling across law books and coffee cups. Meanwhile, at the old white-steepled church on the edge of town, Dr. Orville Pike took the pulpit during the senior meeting. His hands gripped the lectern, knuckles pale as he read from a death certificate, respiratory failure, complications from unverified medication. He did not name Harriet's Mart, but the implication hung like heavy incense. Some bowed their heads, others avoided his eyes. Still, one old woman whispered, "Amen." It was a crack in the stone. When Silas returned to what remained of his room, he sat among the charred boards, Valor's steady breathing filling the silence. Ash drifted across his boots like gray snow. He picked up the one photograph that had fallen face down and survived. Ellie Mae crouched in the junkyard, Valor's muzzle nudging her small hand. He taped it back on the wall, alone but central. Then he wrote in bold across the plaster, "No more shadows. I will stand in the light." The next morning, he walked to the library and booked the hall. A notice appeared on the bulletin board by afternoon. Public meeting. The truth about Silver Ridge. Speaker, Silas Kane. Children whispered at the sight of Valor pacing beside him, fitted with his service harness once again, the words "working dog" stitched into its strap. To some, it looked like a police K-9 ready for duty. To others, it looked like the old order being challenged. For Silas, it was simply a promise. He would no longer be nameless. The library meeting had ended in tension thick enough to taste. Some townsfolk had whispered their agreement. Others crossed their arms, unwilling to risk belief, but all had listened. Silas could still feel their eyes on him as he left, Valor's harness tight against his grip. Outside, the sheriff's patrol car idled with its headlights off, and Cole Maddox leaned against the fender, arms folded, the half-smile of a man who trusted his silence more than words. Silas met his gaze and walked past without a word, but he knew the message was clear. You are being watched. That night, Silver Ridge sank into uneasy quiet, and the mountain wind rattled the shutters of its old houses. At the Quinn home, however, quiet cracked. Neighbors later recalled the slam of a truck door and the muffled protests of children. Darla Quinn, thin, hair a wild tangle, bathrobe thrown over her shoulders, was seen dragging Ellie Mae and Lila Rose into the back of her battered pickup. The engine coughed like a dying animal before growling into motion, disappearing down the unlit road. When Silas heard the knock at his door just before midnight, it was not the sheriff but Miss June, her face drained of color. "They're gone," she said breathlessly. "The twins." Darla took them. Her hands trembled around a folded sweater she had carried from her classroom Ellie's, left behind that morning. Silas did not waste time on disbelief. He reached for his phone, called Jasper. "I need traffic cams, gas stations, anything that catches her truck." Jasper's voice on the other end sharpened, rapid keystrokes already beginning. Valor pawed at the floor, restless, nose lifted to the wind. Silas knelt, held out the pink woolen scarf Ellie had worn the day before. The German shepherd sniffed once, twice, then whined low, recognition flooding his posture. "Find," Silas ordered softly, and Valor's body aligned like a compass needle pointing west. Hours later, armed with grainy camera stills Jasper had funneled through an old Chevy pickup fueling up on Route 14, Darla's face blurred but unmistakable. Silas drove into the desert, the land unfurled in waves of dust and sage, the stars cold and sharp above. Valor sat upright in the passenger seat, nose pressed to the cracked window, ears twitching at every phantom sound. At 3 a.m, they reached the husks of an abandoned mobile home camp. Rusted trailers stood like skeletons, doors rattling in the wind, graffiti long since faded. Valor leapt down first, pulling toward one unit where a faint flicker of light leaked through broken blinds. Silas approached carefully, crowbar in hand. The padlock was old iron, brittle. One strike and the door shuddered open. Inside, the air smelled of sour liquor and damp blankets. The twins huddled together in the corner, knees pulled tight, their eyes wide but silent now, exhaustion having stolen their tears. Their small bodies trembled in the threadbare nightgowns, and their hands clutched each other as if bone could be rope. Darla Quinn sat in a folding chair, head lolling, an empty bottle at her feet. When the door crashed open, she jolted upright, eyes red and glassy. In her hand was a kitchen knife, rust at the edge. Her voice, when it came, was broken glass. "They're mine!" My sister left them. No one takes them from me. She staggered forward, brandishing the knife not with skill, but with despair. Silas stepped between her and the girls, body solid, voice calm. No one is taking them from family. But family doesn't mean prison. Darla's breath heaved, tears streaking through the grime on her cheeks. Valor stood in the narrow space between them, hackles raised but muzzle lowered, emitting a steady growl, a warning, not an attack. His amber eyes locked on Darla's, not letting her forget she was seen. The standstill stretched. Then Darla's arm faltered, the knife clattered to the ground, and she collapsed to her knees, sobbing in gasps that belonged to a child long ago abandoned herself. The sound filled the rusting trailer, a confession in every broken syllable. Silas lowered his crowbar, moved carefully past her, and lifted the twins into his arms. They clung to him, weight almost nothing, yet heavy with everything he had sworn not to ignore. He wrapped them in the blanket he had carried from the truck. Valor pressed against their legs, warm and steady, letting Ellie's hand clutch the harness strap like it was a lifeline. Silas walked out into the night without looking back, the dawn beginning to stain the horizon in thin bands of fire. On the drive back, silence filled the cab. Lila leaned against Silas's shoulder, drifting into shallow sleep. Ellie, though half asleep, never let go of Valor's strap, her fingers curled into the nylon like it was proof of survival. Silas glanced at them, then out toward the paling desert. His throat tightened as words rose unbidden. The end of darkness is not a door. It is a hand that chooses to hold. By the time dawn rolled across the mesas of New Mexico, Silver Ridge no longer looked like the same town Silas had driven back into months earlier. The whispers that once smothered truth had grown into murmurs loud enough for the state authorities to hear. Files, recordings, and testimonies collected by Silas, Jasper, Junon, and Pike piled high enough that no sheriff's drawer could hide them anymore. Within weeks, a summons arrived. Maeve Hargreave was indicted on charges of unlicensed pharmaceutical distribution, tax evasion, and reckless endangerment of public health. Her face, once powdered and sharp behind the counter, was now blurred by the flashbulbs of journalists from Santa Fe and Albuquerque. Sheriff Cole Maddox, his authority crumbling beneath the scandal, resigned at a press conference, his voice thin as he muttered about health reasons. No one clapped. Silas stood outside the courthouse, Valor at his side, not triumphant, but steady. Ellie and Lila clutched each of his hands, their pink dresses replaced now with simple jeans and sweaters given by the school. They no longer looked like shadows pressed against glass. They looked like children reclaiming breath. But Darla's name still hovered. In the weeks following the desert rescue, she had been taken into a rehabilitation center at the edge of Albuquerque, her alcoholism confronted with more structure than she had ever known. The courts, weighing Silas's petition, asked for his recommendation. He wrote a letter not in anger, but in a soldier's measured hand. Let them remember her not only for shouting, but for a chance to change. Let them see she is not erased, only learning. It was enough to grant supervised visitation someday under the watchful eye of social workers. When the judge granted Silas temporary guardianship, then permanent, his breath caught in a way combat had never managed. Papers mattered less than the small hands tightening on his, but they gave the twins what they had been denied all their short lives: stability. At the hearing's close, Ellie whispered, "So now we have a dad." Lila looked at Valor and added, "And a dog brother, too." The judge smiled despite herself, noting in the record children's response: affectionate. With Maeve's store shuttered and its windows boarded, the question arose, what next? The townsfolk, once silent, surprised even themselves by turning to Silas. And so the old pharmacy, once a place of poison and dismissal, was torn down, brick by brick, to make way for something new. On that ground rose a modest building with clean glass windows and cedar siding, the Emily Center, named for Silas's mother, who had once begged for medicine at that very counter. Inside were shelves of donated books, a classroom where the smell of bread, baking replaced dust, and a free Saturday clinic staffed by volunteers. Miss June took charge of the transparent medicine cabinet, a public ledger where every pill and syrup stocked in Silver Ridge had its origin posted plainly. It was her way of reclaiming faith in the word teacher to show children that adults could tell the truth. Dr. Pike returned every weekend, his cardigan still patched, his hands still steady as he checked lungs and listened for coughs that once went unheard. "I may not have my license back," he told a mother one afternoon, "but I still have ears." And ears can save lives, Jasper, though far in Albuquerque, filed the paperwork that placed Silver Ridge on the state register as a child-friendly community. The phrase was bureaucratic, but for the children who now had safe meals and after-school classes, it meant playgrounds, not alleys. Jasper, once a soldier, once a skeptic, had become the architect of legitimacy for a town that had nearly collapsed. And Valor, always watchful, always loyal, found his new mission in the Emily Center. Every Wednesday afternoon, he lay on a mat in the reading room, his head resting between his paws, as shy children pressed their cheeks into his back and stumbled through picture books. Ellie and Lila read the loudest, each word more confident than the last, their laughter echoing off walls that had once held silence. Valor never corrected, never scolded. His tail thumped softly with each sentence completed. At their new home, a modest adobe house with a yard, Silas planted rows of vegetables in the hard soil. The twins watered the sprouts, watching green push against dust. One evening, Ellie looked up. Dirt streaked across her cheek and said, "If vegetables can grow here, then we can too." Silas crouched, brushed the soil from her nose, and answered simply, "Exactly." On the day of the Emily Center's opening, the town gathered. A ribbon fluttered at the door, scissors ready in the mayor's hand. Silas stood apart, half hidden behind the cottonwoods, his soldier's instinct never to stand in the spotlight. He intended to watch, nothing more. But Ellie and Lila spotted him. They ran, braids swinging, Valor trotting at their heels. They grabbed his hands, tugged with childish insistence. "Daddy, come inside," Ellie said, her voice steady. "This is our house now." "Yours too," Lila threw her arms around Valor's neck, whispering. "And his?" Silas let himself be pulled across the threshold. For the first time in decades, he stepped into a building not to fight, not to investigate, but to belong. The smell of baking bread filled the air. The laughter of children rose like a hymn. Silas Kane, the man who had once promised never to stay anywhere, knew that this finally was his battle won. Sometimes the greatest change does not come from power or wealth, but from the choice to stay, to protect, and to believe that no child should stand hungry at a window again. The Emily Center became more than a building. It became proof that light is built one small act at a time. If this story touched your heart, share your thoughts in the comments. Do you believe that one act of kindness can change an entire town? I would love to hear your voice. Remember to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and follow for more stories of hope, justice, and the bond between people and those who stand by them. Together we can keep these stories alive.